Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new show starring me, 86 Forever's Caleb Wilkins. It's called Getting Mad, and I've been wanting to do something kind of like this for a while, something kind of podcasty, but I've been a little hesitant because we're quickly reaching a point where there's about 15 online Whitecaps fans, and every single one of them has their own podcast. So, it's already a very diluted market for how large the potential audience is. But nevertheless, I like to think that I have sort of a unique style, and that I have something to offer. Plus, we have this YouTube channel, which needs some content. So unless Sam listens to this and is like, no, Caleb, this is way too cringe, we can never upload it. I thought this might be a good vehicle for me. So there's going to be some visual element to this, but if you just throw on Football Manager or something, or Civ, then you're not going to miss a whole lot. Okay. So moving on to the first slide, I have a broad overview of what I see as the pros and cons of the Whitecaps season so far. I think, it's kind of an interesting time right now as to where you think the Whitecaps are so far, because they started off well in terms of like winning and losing, and then they lost 3 in a row, and I think that's melted everybody's brains. So what we're going to try and do today is we're going to try and look as scientifically as possible, hopefully with some fun thrown in at where they are so far. So there's a pros and cons list. Hopefully you've been reading that. I'm trusting you to read it. I'm not going to just read off a slideshow for you. You'll see there's 5 pros and 4 cons, though I would argue the cons are quite a bit more devastating than the pros are positive. Here on slide number 3, we can see the first issue. A lot of the issues, a lot of the strengths and weaknesses, the relative strengths and weaknesses of this Whitecaps team kind of dovetail together. But so far, it's not been amazing. It's been pretty decent. It's been much improved from previous seasons. As we can see on this slide, the Whitecaps used to be the worst team in possession and the worst team at spending time in their own third. But now, still not great, but definitely not last. I argue they're the worst middling team is how I would describe how they fit into the grand scheme of MLS. At least in terms of things of possession and of how much time they're stuck in their own defensive third. And the reason for this is that the passing play of the midfield players, the 3 most used midfield players, has been surprisingly good. As we can see in this chart, Alexandre, Baldissimo, and Bikel are all, except for Bikel in terms of how vertical his passes are, all above average passers. Alexandre and Baldissimo doing a great job of progressing that ball from deep areas. Obviously they run into some problems once they get a little further up the field, but those deep progressions are happening in a way that they weren't necessarily before. And you might be wondering, as we move on to the next slide, okay, well, if these midfielders are passing better, then why do things still look so similar? One interesting wrinkle, I think this is a smaller part of the overall picture of why things don't look better, but one thing that I noticed is that the defenders are passing more conservatively than they were before. On this slide, we can see the verticality of the passes of Andy Rose, Christian Gutierrez, and Ranko Veselinovic, comparing their 2020 self and their 2021 self. I'm not quite sure what the reason for this is. This is the sort of thing you would have to watch out for in future games. I don't know if that's, that play is getting delegated more to Alexandre and Baldissimo, if it's some kind of tactical change, but definitely something to watch out for. But the real problem is, even though the team, at least from its midfielders, is getting good ball progression, that ball progression is not being turned into chances. It's not being turned into passes into the penalty area. As you can see on this slide, the Whitecaps are terrible at passing the ball into the penalty area. Only FC Cincinnati are worse. This is one stat that they have not improved in at all. Usually they've been down at the bottom in these kinds of stats, shots for, shots against, possession, all the markers of being good at soccer. And this year they've come up a little bit in a lot of those stats, but passes into the penalty area, not one of those stats that they've come up in. Here we have the heat maps from their last 6 games. We didn't include the Portland one because I couldn't fit it on the slide, but rest assured it shows basically the same thing. I think it's pretty clear that there's a bit of a bottleneck. They get pretty far up the wings in a lot of these. They get into the other team's half pretty well. But as soon as you hit that sort of middle of the final third, the play dies. Axel Schuster has talked a lot about the need for a link player, be that a traditional number 10 or a deep lying forward or a very aggressive box-to-box player. And I mean, he's certainly right about that. He's definitely identified a weakness because that link right now is totally non-existent. I think if you just think about like the flow of the Whitecaps team and how it's supposed to work, the defenders and Janio Bakel, they win the ball back, they give it to one of Baldissimo or Alexandre, who passes it to that link player, who passes it to one of the front three, who scores or makes one more pass, and then they score. But without that link, not a lot is happening. So you have Alexandre and Baldissimo, good progressors of the ball. You have Cavallini, you have Caicedo, and you have Dahomey. Cavallini, a great receiver of the ball in those dangerous areas. Caicedo and Dahomey, pretty decent 1v1 if they're up against one defender, but none of them are link players. So a lot of that link play doesn't end up happening. And that's a source of big problems because the Whitecaps have struggled so much with creating chances from open play. It's almost a meme at this point. That player is desperately needed is what I'm trying to say here. And it seems pretty obvious that the team, whether this was by design or not, is totally built around having that player. And right now that player isn't there, and the effects are just obvious because they can't compensate in any way. Usually, the way they try to compensate as we move on to the next slide is that Lucas Cavallini has been dropping back into a sort of false 9 role. So to show why that is a bad thing, why that drives me up the wall, I've shown from FB reference where he's getting his touches relative to other strikers. As you can see, lots of touches in his defensive penalty area, the defensive third and the midfield third, compared to other MLS strikers. Almost nothing in the attacking third or the penalty area. So you can see in the stats very clearly that Cavallini is dropping back. Your eyes do not deceive you when you watch the games. And then you compare that to his actual, his passing accuracy, his progressive passes, and they're terrible. I mean, Cavallini is a very good player. He's really great at winning aerial duels, really great at getting into the box, but he's looked very limited this year because he's doing this stuff. I don't know if he's being asked to do it. I don't know if he's just doing it because the ball doesn't get progressed otherwise. But he sucks at it. He's so bad. Terrible. And, that's okay. If he was good at everything, he wouldn't play for the Whitecaps. He would play for Barcelona. But right now, he's being made to do stuff that he is not good at, and less of the stuff that he is good at. You might remember in one of my articles entitled How Lucas Cavallini Works that I anticipated, I predicted that there would be big media talk about how he's struggling, he can't score. But it's no secret why he's not scoring. He's not scoring because he's not doing the things that have made him a successful player. He's doing the things that are weaknesses for him. But the good news is when that vaunted, dreamed of DP number 10 finally arrives, my concern that Cavallini will return to his previous form is 0%. I'm 100% certain that he will start scoring again when he has that link player behind him, because that's how he's always been successful throughout his career. That's how he had his most success in Vancouver, his best goal-scoring run. He had Freddie Montero playing behind him. Freddie Montero, not exactly, the ideal number 10, but he was competent enough, and playing with him improved Cavallini's game significantly because he didn't have to drop deep into those areas, and he could focus on the things he is good at, which is bullying defenders with his physicality, making good moves in the box. That's his thing, and he should only ever be made to do that thing. Now, granted, there's not a lot of other good options for players to be the link player in the squad right now. You can definitely be critical of not having at least a stopgap to play that role when it's so crucial to the team, like how lacking that skill set is. But the good news is, I think they're well set up when that player finally comes. My God, we've been waiting so long. When it finally comes, I think they're well set up to capitalize on it. And maybe I'll get into that a little bit more later on. Moving to the next slide. A lot of people have talked about the Whitecaps' defensive improvement, and that's kind of true, but also kind of not. They've given up the fewest shots on average per game in the Mark DeSantos era, so that's good. In the past, as you can see on this slide, they absolutely got shelled in 2019, and in 2020 their number came down a bit, but they were also giving up 20 shots a game. Now it's down to a respectable 15, which, like their possession, like their time in the final third, not amazing, but way, way better than it used to be. Just miles better than it used to be. But one way that they've gotten worse, and this is kind of concerning because this used to be a strength, is the quality of the shots that they are giving up has increased significantly. So even though they're giving up less shots than before, their expected goals against has gone up quite a lot. And I have some theories about why that I will talk about on the next slide. That was a great sip of water. Hopefully that'll be edited out. Okay. So, moving on to the next slide, here's why I think we're seeing this this effect where the Whitecaps give up less shots, but the shots they give up are the ones that you don't want to be giving up. So the first one, Maxime Crepeau, according to FB Reference, is the third most active keeper outside of his penalty area. He's not shy about coming off of his line and cutting out a through ball. Last year, the team had Thomas Hasal in goal, and he has many positive qualities, but compared to the MLS average, being a sweeper keeper wasn't really one of them. So Crepeau, more active off his line, he prevents shots from happening, and so that has an effect. And secondly, they have more possession, so there's just less chances for the other team to try and have a shot. That's for why those shots against have been more deadly. The two theories that I have been able to come up with, aside from just general defensive organization and whatnot, one, Janio Piquel, a player who's been relied upon a lot when he's been fit to be a defensive shield in front of the back four, has kind of been struggling so far. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but he was very good at, in 2020 at least, very good at stopping those dangerous attacks in their tracks before they became a serious problem. Not so far. And my other major theory is that there's been limited action due to injury for Eric Godoy. Godoy is one of the few players on the Whitecaps that I can say is good without any kind of qualification. I don't say, oh, he's good considering this, or, oh, he has the potential to be good. No, he's just good. He's just very good. Pretty much any metric that you use to measure a center back, he's just excellent. and not having him available would be a serious blow to any team, but is an especially serious blow to a team like the Whitecaps, who are operating on quite fine margins if they want to be successful. A little bit more on Janio Bikel and his performance so far. On the left there, I have his end-of-season chart from his 2020 season. And on the right, I have how he's done so far. And, there's some improvement in terms of his dribbles and his passing, although it's less vertical than before. And if you just had that and still had him defending well, that would be great. But if you look down at the bottom, a big area of concern, a lot less tackles, and his success on those tackles has gone down significantly. Last year, Bikel was one of the best ball-winning midfielders in MLS. I think Whitecaps players get described as one of the best in MLS for their position way more often than is warranted. But the stats don't lie. He made a lot of tackles, and he wasn't running around like a chicken with his head cut off. Like, when people dribbled against him, most of the time they did not get past him. But this year, people are getting past him. Bikel's only 26, so I wouldn't expect there to be age-based decline from him at this point. But it's concerning. I think he can probably get it back. But something to watch out for, definitely, especially with Michael Baldissimo. I don't think it's mentioned in this slideshow I made anywhere, but his defensive stats this year are way better, at least in terms of like tackles and stuff and tackle success. You might have noticed on the first slide, I had one under the cons. I had working harder, not smarter. That's because Axel Schuster this year has put a lot of emphasis on the team running more, like literally doing more sprints and covering more distance. I did about 5 seconds of research on this, and from what I have read, this may be wrong, but from what I have read, it seems there is some correlation between running more than your opposition and winning, but it's a very slight correlation. I'm not sure if this is what I would be focusing on personally. And part of the reason that I would not be focusing on it is that if you look at the Whitecaps pressing, once again, pressing much more than in previous seasons. Not last in pressing, they've been last in pressing for a long time. And of course, we've been talking about the pressing for a long time. That's partly my fault. When Mark Dos Santos first became the coach, I did a bunch of research on him, and I was like, oh, he's always pressed high. And now we're all watching out for this high press, which has never come. So I'm sorry about that. That's my bad. But now they are pressing more, but they are the least successful pressers in the entire league. When they press, they only win the ball back 24.8% of the time, which is
terrible.
Yeah, it's the worst. It's terrible. So they're pressing more, but those presses are bad. They're, you can then combine this knowledge with watching the games, and you better believe I watch those games, baby. This is one of those stats. Sometimes stats don't match up with the eye test. You're like, oh, that's interesting. But I saw this, and I was immediately like, oh yeah, that checks out completely. How many times have we seen one or two players press, and then that press gets immediately beaten super easily, and the other team just totally carves through the Whitecaps and gets a chance? I feel like it happens a lot, especially the Colorado game. If you go back and watch that game, that happened a ton in that game. So pressing organization and pressing effectively remains a problem. And as we move along to the next slide, this is maybe the main takeaway from this. The Whitecaps are not good.
Terrible.
They are not on track to be a playoff team. Even when they were winning and people were like, oh, they look a little better now. Even then, their underlying data was not indicating that they were on track to be a playoff team. There's been some mitigating circumstances on this, of course. They've been without Ali Adnan, who, in my opinion, is a genuinely very good player. They've had very limited time with Eric Godoy. They haven't been able to get the DP number 10 over the line, and the team is very built around having that player. So there's some mitigating circumstances for this, but, there's no bottom line. This is not good. 7th from the bottom in expected goals, 4th from the bottom in expected goals against, 4th from the bottom in expected goal difference, 5th from the bottom in expected points. They're not as bad as the true bottom feeders. You'd definitely rather be the Whitecaps than FC Cincinnati. They're not the worst team in MLS, but they're not good. They've managed to keep these games pretty close to the point where luck can be a factor. So aside from the Sporting Kansas City game, you can say, oh, well, they got a bit lucky against Portland. They got a bit lucky against Toronto, a bit lucky against Montreal. They got a bit unlucky against Minnesota, Colorado, and Houston. But it's not like they've been, although luck may have played a factor in those individual games, you can't really feel aggrieved about where they sit in the standings at this point. Moving on to the next slide, and this, even though I've just come off a very grim point, I think this is a reason, the number one reason, maybe even, to feel positive. On the American Analysis soccer podcast, which I'm an avid listener of, gotta say, Harrison and Ian said in their season preview that the Whitecaps might not be moving in the right direction yet, but they have at least turned around to face the right direction. And, one of the biggest shakeups in the team this offseason was the addition of Nikos Overhuel as that head of recruitment, along with his scouting staff. And the team invested a lot of money in 2 young players, Diber Caicedo and Kyle Alexandre, whose charts you can see on this screen. And both of those guys, pretty good. Are they dominating the league? No, definitely not. Are they the best player in their position? No. But they're 2 guys who are 21 and 22 respectively, and they're generally above average for their position. So these are guys who were identified as young players who could come in, contribute now, but more importantly, grow with the team, grow in terms of their on-field contribution and in terms of their transfer market value, which, you know how the Whitecaps front office loves to make a financially prudent decision. This is really good news, I think, for 2 main reasons. One, of course, we have that still ongoing, that lengthy search for a DP number 10. And I'm feeling pretty confident, based on the work of these guys so far, that they're going to get that one right. Like I said, they haven't signed anyone who's blown the league away, but they went out looking for 2 young guys who could fill those young DP slot. They went out looking for 2 young guys to fill those young DP slots. They got 2 guys who contribute now, who, if all goes well, will continue to develop and get better. So that leads you to believe that if they go out looking for a DP number 10, they're going to find one that's good. But more importantly, I think, this is something I've kind of been thinking about for a while. If you're an MLS team and you're trying to put your team together, you have a lot of options. Just about any league in the world where players get paid to play soccer, there's a few players who could play in MLS. Think about the Canadian Premier League, near and dear to our hearts. Not the highest level of football in the world, sure, but can you think of 5 players who could play in MLS and the CPL? Yeah. Would they be stars? I don't know. Would they be in and amongst the sort of middle of the pack of MLS players? Yeah, probably. And you can extrapolate that to pretty much every league in the world. So, I don't want to say making those DP signings are easy, but where the difference is really made between a good MLS team and a bad MLS team are those middle of the roster players that you pick from that barely differentiated mass of players out there. It makes a big difference if your team signs Leonard Owusu or Mark-Anthony Kaye, if your team signs Anthony Blondell or Kasper Shabilko. Like, that makes a world of difference. If you can find players who play like a DP, but who you don't have to play DP money, that's when you start building those teams that really take the league by storm. And it's early, but the early results of that new Whitecaps recruitment department shows that they might be able to do that. So that's a reason to be hopeful. But of course, I have to talk about the main man, Marc Dos Santos. Every time the Whitecaps have like a bad loss and we do the report card, there's always some guy in the comments. There's always some guy who's like,
"And what grade, good sir? What grade do you assign to the manager of this sorry lot? Should he be thrown to a pit of vipers for his poor performance?"
And, I'm a people pleaser, so, I gotta give those guys what they want. We're doing Marc Dos Santos discourse again on Twitter, the 45 or so of us who still tweet about the team. And, I was a very early booster. I wrote some articles that I think probably influenced the way people think about him and talk about him. I like to think that anyway. That might be arrogant to say, but, I did a bunch of research on him, and I thought he was going to be good. Fair to say, hasn't worked out how I'd hoped so far.
At all. Terrible.
How much of that is his fault? People will debate, and they debate. But I think I've talked a little bit before in articles about why I think I got a lot wrong in his first season. Fully, hand on my heart, I screwed that up. That season inspired me to, read and learn a lot more. And I think, for the most part, my analysis of situations has been better ever since then. But one of the things that always got to me was and still gets to me. I'm not going to pretend that the haters don't get to me. That's not true. If you're online and you hate me, and you want to send me into a spiral of self-doubt and loathing, it's very easy to do. But one of the things that has, I think, clouded my vision in the past is that, I am a freak who cares more about this team than is healthy for me. So if I get a new player or a new manager, I do a bunch of research and I learn everything that there is to know about their life story and their stats and the way they play. And I feel I have a good grasp of this. I know a lot of information. And then there will be one person online who'll be like, "The cheap club, fucking never managed an MLS. He's shit. I don't want him, cheap club." And I'll be like, God, I just did so much work. I just learned so much. And this asshole is just dismissing him offhand. And then I would get mad and I would get defensive. And so now I try not to read the comments ever because I don't want to be influenced by them because they're something that influenced me. Very bad, it's a major character failing of mine that I get too mad online, which is why this podcast is called what it is. And I think, in general, those people and all people feel a bit frustrated that the people who write about the team are too deferential to Marc Dos Santos, that we are not hard enough on him. I remember recently at a press conference, he was like, "Oh, things are going well now, but you guys are so critical of me. And that kind of pissed me off, because if the people who write for these blogs, like 86 Forever and then the other ones out there, if we were like the voice of like the average fan, maybe not the average fan, but at least the fans in the Whitecaps supporters group Facebook group, we'd have been calling for his head after like 10 games. But I think the reason that we don't do that is Mark DeSantis has always been very good at what's the word? At pointing out, I guess you'd say. He's always been very good at pointing out what the flaws of the team are. He does not come out after a very bad loss where the team looked disjointed and couldn't progress the ball and say, well, we're going to work on crossing and shooting this week. Like, he actually, he shows that he sees the same things that we see. And we like that. We're like, oh, this guy gets it. He sees the things that we see. We're not crazy for observing them. And so I think that openness is what makes us more sympathetic than the person who just watches the game and then goes online to get mad. Not that I'm looking down on going online to get mad, obviously. That's most of what I do. But at the end of the day, you can't just be a witness to suffering, You have to actually do something about these problems. Although I don't necessarily think that the Whitecaps have this great untapped potential in their squad, I'll talk about that in a second, but I don't really think that, I'll talk about it now. I don't think that this Whitecap squad, as it's currently constructed, is performing significantly behind what you could reasonably expect. I think they have a group of players where if everything goes well, they're challenging for that last playoff spot. And right now, they're just outside the last playoff spot. While playing every game away from home and not having two of their three best players available for most of the time. So I think this is about what you could expect. I don't agree with the idea that this is like some great squad that you should be doing much better with. However, having said that, there are things like Cavallini dropping deep, like the poor performance of the press in terms of actually winning the ball back, that's all down to organization. That's down to coaching. And that's concerning, especially after 3 years of not much progress. Some progress, as we've outlined, but not much. A lot of the same problems that have always plagued this team continue to plague this team with slight variations and in slightly different ways. Part of my change in thinking that I referenced at the start of this long, rambly section is that I don't necessarily see the manager as like an auteur with a great vision anymore. I see the manager as a less important part of running a successful football club now than I did before, I think. I see the role of the manager less so as being like the great vision who runs the whole club as a guy whose job is to maintain good vibes, put the players in roles that they can succeed in, and get them organized, basically. And the good thing about the additions of like Axel Schuster and the recruitment team is that we don't have to worry so much about how the manager performs in those realms. We can only focus on how he does on the pitch. But cutting a long ramble short, how do I feel about Mark DeSantis now? I'm kind of ambivalent. I wouldn't be like upset if he got fired, but I don't think that would totally turn things around either. I don't know really how much I disagree with how the team's been set up so far based on the players available, and I don't know how much better you could reasonably expect them to be based on the construction of the squad so far. The good news is I think, if you add that DP number 10 and it's any level of decent player, I think that's such an important role to the way the team is constructed that they would improve significantly if that player gets brought in, no matter who the coach is. So I think there's a path to being better, definitely. I think lots of players who are kind of meh right now would be elevated significantly by having a decent player in their in that number 10 role. But yeah, I wouldn't be too upset if they got rid of Mark. I wouldn't be too upset if they kept him. It's not something I think about that much anymore, which is maybe sounds like a cop out considering how hard I went in for him at the start. But what can I say? That's how I feel. Lastly, I want to finish up on a more serious note, I suppose. This show is a celebration of going online and getting mad. I get mad about a variety of topics. The Whitecaps, the world. But getting online and getting mad without taking any real world action is very bad for your brain. That's a one-way ticket to Insanesville. So, what I have been doing lately is donating the small monthly stipend I get from SB Nation to what I consider to be worthy causes. And it's made me feel significantly better. It feels good to do good things. And so I thought maybe as a community we could come together every month or however often I do these, and we could talk about what some good like local causes are that people can donate to, who you're donating to, and it's just it's a good way to fight back the brain poison that comes from being online. So this month I've donated to Islamic Relief's Canada Palestine Fund. Obviously, with the occupations in Gaza going on this month, and for quite some time really, that's been forefront in a lot of people's mind. Hey everyone, this is Caleb from a different point in time. While we were editing this, the bodies of 215 Indigenous children were discovered on the grounds of a former residential school. And it didn't really feel right to put this out without acknowledging that, since the last part of this podcast is about channeling your anger at an unjust world towards positive change, I suppose. Now, I learned about residential schools in school quite a bit, but as I understand it, that's a pretty recent development. Apparently for a long time, and in some places still, there's been a practice in Canada to just not teach anyone about them. So I would strongly encourage you, if that's the case for you, to read up on them and reflect on what they say about Canadian history and our place as settlers, if indeed you are a settler listening. It's tough, man. I feel like I don't really know what to say, but if anything, the ethos of getting mad is that simply getting mad is not enough, and tangible actions are required. So in addition to the donation I referenced earlier, I've also donated $50 to the Indian Residential School Survivor Society. That was an Indigenous organization that was posted by the Swan Guardians, who are the TSS Rovers supporters group. I'm sure there's lots of good Indigenous organizations out there. That's just the one that I gave to. A sad day and a sad reminder of the realities of Canadian history and the Canadian present. So that's where I've sent my money this month. Sound off in the comments, shout out what you think is a good cause, and let's all get mad together, but in the services of good. That'll wrap this one up from me. Let me know what you thought in the comments, please. I want feedback. I will actually read these comments because I want this to be good and not just like another generic MLS podcast. If you're listening and you have a podcast, I'm not talking about your podcast when I say it's generic and boring. Yours is obviously good. It's all the other ones. That'll be all. Thanks, guys. Look forward to seeing those comments. Look forward to seeing the reception. Again, that's if Sam lets me upload this. He might decide that it is too cringe. So thank you, and I will see you next time.